Hello, and welcome to the Artificial Podcast, with your host Nick Myers.
Artificial
Intelligence,
voice recognition,
machine learning,
robotics,
actionable analytics.
It is Nick's goal to help everyone understand how AI and voice technology are reshaping our lives both personally and within organizations. Your glimpse into the growing world of AI and voice first starts now.
Nick Myers.
Nick Myers.
Nick Myers.
Nick Myers.
Welcome to the Artificial Podcast. My name is Nick Myers, and I am here to help break down topics in emerging technology, artificial intelligence, and voice to help everyone understand how these technologies are impacting our lives both personally and within our organizations. The Artificial Podcast is brought to you by Red Fox AI. Red Fox AI helps give brands a voice by leveraging the power of AI and voice assistant technologies like Alexa and Google Assistant. If you or your organization is interested in sponsoring an episode, please send an email to the artificialpodcast at redfox-ai.com. If you like what you hear, please feel free to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You can also follow the Artificial Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube by searching for the Artificial Podcast. Thank you for listening, and now on to this week's episode. Hey there, Artificial Podcasters. Welcome back to another week and another episode of the Artificial Podcast. My name is Nick Myers, and this week I'm very excited to welcome Adrian Simple from the Gaming Observer to the Artificial Podcast. And for those of you who definitely have an interest in the video game industry or the video game space, you may have heard about his flash briefing, the Gaming Observer, but this episode we're really just going to dive into how he was able to grow his flash briefing so quickly to reach so many people and just the video game industry in general, because emerging tech is really impacting the space. But before Adrian and I start talking here, let me tell you a bit about Adrian Simple. So Adrian is the founder and host of the Amazon Alexa flash briefing, the Gaming Observer. Every single day, he covers the latest news in video games in 3 to 5 minutes. Since launching about a year and a half ago, the Gaming Observer has seen unexpected success. Outside of his work in the voice world, Adrian is a full-time student in Toronto, Canada. Adrian, welcome to the Artificial Podcast. How are you?
Hello, Nick. I'm doing extremely well. Thank you for that introduction. That was pretty comprehensive.
Absolutely. No, and I think before I started recording here, I know we were kind of talking about our mutual interest in the video game space, so I've really been looking forward to having a talk with you here, especially since a couple weeks ago I activated your flash briefing and have been listening to that pretty much every morning when I go through my routine, and it's so well done. So I'm really excited for you to be able to kind of share how you got this going in the process and all that great stuff.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think for sure, like, I've been doing this, as you mentioned, for a year and a half now, and I've kind of spent a lot of time thinking about the show and how to improve it and whatnot. And, I really care a lot about sharing that information. So I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, to kick things off here, how did your interest in video games just begin in general? And how did that interest lead you to create the Gaming Observer and ultimately enter the voice space?
Oh, wow. Okay. So, I've had a controller in my hand since I was 4 years old. So I've been playing games forever. So I started off with a Super Nintendo, which was before my time, but we had it at home. And then we moved on to an original Xbox. As I grew up, I played various Nintendo consoles and Xbox consoles. I kind of stayed away from PlayStation for pretty much my whole life. Not intentionally, just so happened to go that way. And then nowadays, I'm primarily a PC player, but I do still have an Xbox One, and I'm kind of obviously keeping up to tabs with the industry as a whole. And that's what I was doing my whole life. Even if I didn't have a certain game or a certain console, I was always on the internet. So I always knew what was going on in the video game world. I always had this really big passion for it. And similarly, on that sort of same track, growing up, I was big into performance. And I was big into radio and voice work, and I was looking at being a voice actor, and I was on the stage and all of this stuff. Yeah. And it was a really interesting period where I remember I was in grade 6 and somebody said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I have no idea. I just know I want to work with my voice." And so, I was thinking like radio or something. So I got into high school. I joined an arts program, and I discovered the technical side of live performance. I joined my school's tech crew. I eventually ran that tech crew, and then before I came to university, I was working in technical theater. Now I'm studying technical theater, and so I've kind of been around this whole gaming performance aspect for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
At some points in like 2017, maybe I was like, okay, for whatever reason, I want to start writing, and I tried to think of an idea for what I could write about with video games, and that's where I came up with the name of the Gaming Observer, because it's like adapting from like newspaper conventional titles.
Yeah.
And I had it, and then I hated writing, and so I was like, okay, that's enough of that. Then a few months later, my friend comes to me and she says, hey, I found out about this new thing called flash briefings, and Alexa and voice technology and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, that's a really cool concept. Another thing I didn't mention was that I really wanted to be a YouTuber when I was a teenager. I really grew out of that phase quite quickly, but I was really into the Let's Plays and the all of that stuff. And so all of a sudden I heard about this flash briefing thing. I was like, that's really cool. So I buy myself a device, and I look through the flash briefings, and I see that the only video game coverage happening was IGN, which is the biggest news network in the world right now, and for video games. And they didn't have particularly good reviews on Amazon either. And so I saw that, and I was like, hey, I could probably do this. And I already had the microphone because I wanted to be a YouTube Let's Player. And so I just started making a show. And then within, a few weeks, I had a few hundred listeners. So it really, it snowballed quite quickly. And sort of this opportunity arose through a lot of different ways, kind of just converging into one path. And it's really worked.
Yeah. First, from kind of that synopsis you gave there, I just want to say that I totally get why you wanted to do something with voice acting with your voice, because you have truthfully one of the best radio voices I've heard. And that was the first thing that actually popped into my head when I listened to your flash briefing for the first time. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, he was like, you were like made for this, just because your voice is like what you would think of when you are like the stereotypical amazing radio voice that you hear out there. So I'm not shocked by that at all. And I think that's super fascinating. And I love that, just since you were really little, you've been engrossed in video games. Some people I've talked to who claim to like try and be really knowledgeable with video games are like, oh yeah, I've been playing only for the past couple of years and different things. But it's like you said, from age 4, you had a video game controller in your hand. So it's just been a part of your life and a part of who you are. So kudos to you for getting this up and running so quickly and finding your niche, because IGN, I would agree, is definitely one of the largest, really one of the only two when you think about it en masse publishers and voice. Do you remember G4?
What, sorry?
G4, was that just in
G4.
the United States? G4, do you remember that?
It's possible. I mean, I might have also just been too young, because I'm only 22, right? So I'm actually catching up on a lot of video game stuff as I do this, but.
Well, it's really interesting because G4, and then this was kind of back, and I'll be candid, I'm 25, so not a few years off from you, and maybe this was just something in the US, but there was this other company called G4 that was kind of like they were the second to IGN, but they actually had like a television station and did all this reporting and different things.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they actually got bought out probably, I think it was the late 2000s or early 2010s by Esquire magazine, and they like totally went off the radar, and then it was just IGN all the time. So that's why I really think it's cool that you were able to kind of come in with something and a niche platform like flash briefings through Amazon Alexa and kind of offer a different set of perspective on the video game industry. I think that's super cool. So what has it been like producing your Amazon Alexa flash briefing, and why do you think it has grown so rapidly over the last year and a half?
How has it been? Fundamentally life-changing, truthfully, and we'll maybe talk a little about that later, but why was it successful? I think it actually ties in really to why IGN maybe wasn't doing so well on the platform, and it's because flash briefings are super curated to the independent creator, or not even necessarily the independent creator, but for creating a personality. It's a platform where you're with your listener every single day, pretty much guaranteed, assuming that they're doing their routine every single day. You're going to be there. And so really what it does is it creates this ability for someone to have a constant presence in someone's life, all in a way become a friend to that person,
Mm-hmm.
and say, hey, I'm here with you, let's talk about something we both care about. And so the reason why my show took off was because nobody else was doing what I was doing. If you listen to the IGN show, it sounds like IGN, the news network, telling you the news. Whereas, at least at the time, I don't know about now, but now, with my show, it's, hey, it's Adrian Simple, the guy who also loves video games, and he's going to
Yeah.
tell you about those video games.
Yeah, I
So
would.
that's
No,
oh,
I
go ahead.
think that's truly where you've hit the nail on the head with this, is you create that personalization in your space that I don't really think exists. And again, I haven't listened to IGN in a while either. I think I had theirs enabled at one point, but turned it off because I think, to your point, it was just like regurgitating the website information.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's another aspect to it, is that a big thing for flash briefings too is not regurgitating content. We're in this era of using a bunch of content creation en masse and then redistributing it as much as possible.
Right.
But I think with flash briefings, like this is the true ability for somebody to tune into someone you care about and have that person in your life every single day. And if you're willing to make that commitment, then you're probably already listening to that person in other platforms,
Right.
maybe on a daily basis as well. So if you're just hearing the same thing, that might not be something you're interested in. Whereas with me, my show, it's completely unique to the platform every single day. And it's basically the only content I create.
Right. Well, and you can tell too when you listen to your flash briefing, like, you care a lot about what you're talking about, and people can pick up on that really easily.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think we've been exposed to so much content now over the last 10 years with social media that we've become really good at picking up whether somebody actually cares about what they're talking about or the content they're putting out. You do. And that's something that came through immediately when I started listening to yours, and why I also think in this emerging sphere of flash briefings and briefcasting and micro content, where you really stand out and definitely contributed to the audience you have, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what's so unique about the platform, right? If you come across a random YouTube video, you don't know what kind of personal connection is going to be made there, and you don't know about the authenticity of that person, whatever it is. If you have doubts about a flash briefing creator, just tune in for 2 weeks and you'll find out,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely. So, with that being said, how do you make sure that you stay consistent with your flash briefing every day of the week? Because, again, listening to how produced your episodes are, I mean, I can only imagine how much time it takes you to stay consistent with that every day. And then, kind of going off of that, what does your content production look like as you're creating this every day? It seems like.
So, uh, maintaining consistency is a mix of like hard work and then like an admitted amount of privilege.
Yeah.
Um, it is no doubt that I am extremely privileged to the fact that I can go to school in the mornings and then not have to work a part-time job
Yeah.
to then produce the show in the evenings. When I started this show, it took about 3 hours to make every episode, just because I was so
Hmm.
unpracticed. What I do every single day is I scroll through my RSS feed of headlines, uh, tab out my favorites, read all the articles, make a script, record the script, edit the audio, upload it, all of that nonsense. And so it takes a lot of time to do that. So now at this point, I've really refined the process. I know if I don't have a script, maybe if I just wing the audio dialogue, then
Hmm.
that's going to be maybe an hour of production. If I'm scripting it, it's going to be longer than that. But really, it's about putting as much work into it as you can to make each episode kind of stand on their own and be valuable to the listener who's tuning in that day. Maintaining the consistency, it's about finding that routine, finding that thing that works for your workflow, and then really just prioritizing it in your life, right? And like I said, maybe it wouldn't have been possible for me if I had to work an evening job every single day or whenever, right? But
Hmm.
as it stands. But on the flip side, on the days that I am busy or on the weeks that I am busy, where I have to do something for my theater school, which requires a lot of evening commitments, or um, I have a lot of homework to do, or whatever it is, it's about making that time where you have that time, if possible. And in the days where I'm not able to do it, I have a co-host, or I have
Hmm.
a friend who can fill in for me, right? So it's just about good organization, good workflow, and just managing it as the best you can.
Absolutely, and definitely your process, just from, again, somebody who's been listening these past couple of weeks, is definitely refined. You can just tell, again, that your episodes are so tight. And I think that speaks to the way that you produce the show. And likewise, I mean, there's always new information coming out in the video game industry. So I also give you credit for being able to consolidate that in such, again, a tight way in 3 to 5 minutes and talking about it in the way that you do. And that speaks, I think, to your production. And I think a lot of people, of course, I'm sure have an interest in like, oh, well, if Adrian can do that, of course I can do that. But again, I think a lot of people don't realize how much work and how much consistency and how much time you really need to set aside to make something well like this, because it is every day and it's people are listening to it every day. So I definitely think that the way you described the way you produce the show, I'm not shocked at all because of how tight and how well done it is. So
And
with
something,
go ahead.
sorry. Something I'd like to mention as well is like, just because I'm taking this amount of time where I'm talking about the newest news with, as up to date as I can be, putting as much work and research and accuracy as I can into it, that's taking a lot of time because I chose for it to be a lot of time, because that's the type of show I wanted to create. There are successful flash briefing creators that can batch record 2 weeks in advance, right? Or they can take a single topic, read about it, and then just riff into their microphone. I think creating a flash briefing is possible in the same way that creating a successful YouTube channel or a successful podcast is, in which there's varying degrees of effort and output that are put into it. So I don't want to discourage anybody who's listening who might be thinking of starting one. You don't need that commitment every single day. There's ways that you can work around it. But when it comes to looking at how the Observer has so unexpectedly snowballed in ways that I never imagined, that's like probably one of the key features of it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, and it really depends again on the level of production you want to put into in different things. And I know people as well who do really good flash briefings who, they have told me firsthand that they riff, but they're really good at riffing, and that works for them. For you, planning it out and producing it and making sure that you have your content in line is the way you like to do it. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that's a really key point. So we kind of touched on, of course, the consistency aspect of developing a flash briefing for Alexa, but what other tips or strategies do you have for anyone seeking to start a flash briefing on their own that you'd like to share that you can think of?
Oh man, there's a lot of things I think that are really essential to making a flash briefing in the first place, let alone trying to make a successful one. Just starting right off the bat, I think it's essential to understand the platform. I think you really need to add a bunch of flash briefings to your lineup, which you will inevitably have to remove some because either one is inactive or you don't like one or whatever it is, and just listen to them for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and just get into this routine that you expect your listener might get into, and figure out what you like, what you dislike, and specifically how the platform works. I've seen a bunch of podcasters try and transition into this space and just not understand that you can't just take your podcast RSS feed and put it on your flash briefing.
Yeah.
There's a time limit of 10 minutes. There's various things that you have to do in order to have content on here, at least for if people want to listen.
Right.
And so doing that research, I think, just to start off with, is really important, and having the context of the platform. Besides that, when it comes to actual content creation, the thing I always try and push is just find something that you really love and want to talk about, and you think that you could talk about every single day for 1 to 10 minutes. It could be your favorite sports team. It could be knitting. It could be cooking. It can be any sort of pastime that you're really interested in. It doesn't have to be your job, right? There's a lot of people working in the voice space right now who might want to start a flash briefing. You don't have to start one about voice technology. There's a lot of people doing that right now. You can literally, if you really love a sports team in your pastime, start talking about it, because you can already talk about it every single day. So you might as well do it into a microphone, right?
Well, and with that too, there truly is a niche for everything. Just when you think there isn't a niche of people for something, there is. I mean, same thing can be said if you look at conferences and different events. Just when you think oh, there can't be a conference for kitchen sink repairmen. There is. So there definitely is a niche audience out there for anything when you're doing a flash briefing as well. I think that's a really good point.
Absolutely. And then think about the platform. If you're a kitchen sink repairman, Is somebody going to listen to you talk for 90 minutes about kitchen sink repair stuff? No, but maybe the person who's hoping to make a new startup of kitchen sink repairs will listen to a 2-minute tip every single day,
Yep.
right? So
Absolutely.
that understanding of the platform is super great for the niches, especially. The other thing I try and say all the time to people who are starting is just experiment and don't limit yourself to anything. Listen to all the flash briefings, see what they're doing, see what you like and what you dislike, but then don't be afraid to try something new. For example, the thing that I say all the time, and I still haven't seen one pulled off, but Amazon gives you 10 minutes to make a flash briefing. Just because it's called a flash briefing does not mean it needs to be brief. It doesn't need to be 1 or 2 minutes. My show is 3 to 5, right? I think I've tried a 10-minute show at some point. I didn't like it for the type of content that I make, but somebody can come out there and make the best 10-minute flash briefing and dominate this market. We have no idea. It's like if you go to YouTube in 2009 and be like, you have to make a YouTube video this way. I think it's silly to like put these constraints on yourself. So, just try new things. And especially if you're creating content for the first time, I think that's really important. Put stuff out there, try new things, figure out what you like and don't like, and then, you'll start going. And then when it comes to the last thing I'll say here, I guess, unless you want me to keep going, but
By all means.
I'll say, okay. I'll say that if you are starting this and you're expecting success, be careful. Just because there are X amount of flash briefings compared to podcasts doesn't mean that you're going to have an audience right off the bat, or maybe at all, right? It's all about the content you're creating and whatever that is. But the other aspect of it is that I got really lucky because I optimized my keywords or whatever it was, but anytime somebody searches video games into the flash briefing search, I'm going to pop up, right? Whereas if you were to come out with a flash briefing video game skill of your own called, game over, right? Something like that, some sort of jargon in the video game space. That doesn't necessarily mean you might show up if you type in video games, right? So I've seen a lot of growth because I was appearing and I was getting so much listener feedback through the Amazon reviews. I have close to 600 of them now.
Wow.
That I was appearing at the top of the charts, right? So like this snowballed on me in ways that I wasn't expecting, but that doesn't mean it's going to snowball for you. And so you really need to work on, okay, how am I going to get onto the eyes of these people? How am I going to get people hooked? Because usually once they tune in for the first time, if your show is good enough, they're going to want to stick around.
Oh yeah, there's a reason for them to keep coming back, and that's the case with viewers too, because I feel like, okay, well, if I listen to Adrian on Monday, then he's going to have more information for me on Tuesday, and if something else happens, it'll be Wednesday, and then you engage people throughout the weekend as well. So you're giving them that reason to engage and come back, which is truthfully the magic, I think, of briefcasting and the flash briefing platform as well, because it is so micro. That's what I love about it. But I think all those different tips that you provided are just spot on. Absolutely. And I think the one that stands out to me from what you just talked about is really considering the platform with the content, because I also have encountered people who think, oh, I can just repurpose my podcast for this platform. Well, maybe, but you really have to think about, all right, the way I do a podcast, can that truthfully be replicated in the short form brief casting that we do on Alexa Flash briefings? You really have to think about that and consider the platform and optimize for that. So I think that is really the tip that stands out for me. It's, when we look at social media, and my background, of course, is a marketing and comms, so I always feel like I have to look at everything through the social media lens. But if you look at social media, you can, to some extent, repurpose content, across different social media platforms. I beg to differ on something that is audio. It needs to be tailored to each audio platform that you're trying to produce for. So I think that's a really, really solid tip that you gave, and probably my favorite out of all the different ones that you just kind of laid out there for everybody.
And I'll tail off of that as well. I heavily encourage anybody who's listening who maybe has an established business and wants to make this a branch or a content stream for them, is to not look at flash briefings as an advertising stream, as a way to bug your listener to interact with you on other platforms every single day. If there's anything I've learned about flash briefings and looking at where the other ones have failed and where, people get the bad Amazon reviews and the listener feedback I've seen on everyone else, it's stop the sponsorships and stop the constant bugging of like, hey, come find me on these other platforms or come buy my thing. Come buy my thing. because they're listening every single day. They're tuning in every single day, and on a YouTube channel, it makes sense because you don't know who's going to watch the video. So
Right.
you want to, once you've hooked them onto the video, you then want to wrangle whatever you can out of them before they click away. But with the flash briefing, people hate skipping their flash briefing. They do not like interacting with their device while their routine is going. And
Yeah.
so if you're forcing them to skip, that's a negative thing with the advertisement. But
Absolutely.
also they're tuning in every single day. So do you need to give them that advertisement every day? Probably not, because once you've hooked them, you have them for a while.
Right. And I'm sure down the road there'll be, as more experimentation happens at different things, people always seem to sneak in CTA some way that makes sense. I just think right now,
Right.
like you said, if you already have them listening to the flash briefing, that's what they're there for every day. It doesn't need to be a bombardment of advertising, because we're so used to that as so many other platforms, right? I think in a way,
Right.
the benefit of flash briefings too is you get a bit of a break from that. When you listen to
Oh,
mass
absolutely.
radio,
Yeah.
or like you said,
And I mean,
YouTube, it's
it's not like Alexa is going, "Hey, here's your weather. By the way, this is sponsored by the Weather Network. Okay, now here's your news." Right? Like that
no.
process in the morning of what am I listening to is not sponsored at all, except for what you might be in your flash briefing.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you there. If you're definitely somebody who's already in this, or somebody who is considering that, don't look at it like an advertising platform. It's just not meant for that at this point in time. Of course, maybe as
At
things
this point,
evolve
yes.
down the road, it could change, but definitely not right now. So what do you think the future has in store for flash briefings and briefcasting in general? Do you think more people are going to continue to find value with micro content? Are we just on the tip of the iceberg with this?
I'm. It's really tough for me. I am not a business person. I don't have a good grasp on voice technology as a whole. I'm kind of a guy who just sits down and records my show every day.
Which is awesome,
But what I
really.
will, yeah, it's been pretty nice for me. But what I will say is that I think a lot of this success is dependent on the people who have control of the feature. Amazon, Google, Bixby. They have the ability to take this microcasting thing or flash briefing thing and make it happen. Unfortunately, with Alexa, they don't necessarily advertise all the features that they have. They don't. It's very difficult to get into the
Yeah.
flash briefing area of the app. Right there's a bunch of barriers that are up right now, and for
Mhm.
all we know, tomorrow Amazon could come out and say we're done with flash briefings. We're canceling the feature.
Right.
If that happens, I don't think all flash briefing creators are necessarily screwed. There's alternatives, but the concept relies a lot on the people who have it in their hands right now.
Mhm.
As for microcasting as a whole, looking at Spotify or other podcast streams, I think it's possible. I think that there's clear benefits to it. Obviously, I get 2,000 listeners a day who are getting a benefit from a short clip of audio, right? And
Yeah.
tons of flash briefing creators are. I think there's a concept there that really works, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to take off, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting you brought up Spotify, because from what I understand, they're really prioritizing podcasting right now. And they actually
Yeah.
acquired Anchor.fm. It was either last year, I think it was, sometime last year.
Yeah.
Because I noticed we host the Artificial Podcast on Anchor.fm. And when I first started using it back in May of last year, it used to say, oh, it's available on all these platforms, right at the top. But now it's just said, listen on Spotify. And then it kind of shows all the other platforms at the bottom in a smaller little
Right.
crossbar. So I think when you consider what you just said, where Amazon could pull the plug on this at any moment. Well, there are other alternatives, especially you look at a platform like Spotify, who really is trying to hone in on the value of podcasting. And who knows, if the right experiment happens, somebody does micro podcasting or briefcasting on Spotify, that could be the next big thing. But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
right now
And I
though,
mean,
I mean, no, go ahead.
I would argue too, we're looking at, okay, is flash briefings as a whole going to take off maybe in the way that podcasts have? Just on a personal level, I don't know if I necessarily care, because
Yeah.
I've been able to take the few thousand people or however many people who are interested in what I'm doing and what the concept provides. And if the idea goes away, I can transition into something else.
Oh yeah,
Like
absolutely.
it's not necessarily limited to, okay, we're staking everything on this.
Right.
But I think it's certainly interesting to see how it's all going to play out.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, let's switch gears a bit here so we can start nerding out over video games
Yes,
and the
please.
impact that technology is having on that, because this is really something I want to to talk with you about. So maybe to get this conversation started, with advancements in video game technology seemingly, expanding just as quickly as other areas of emerging tech, how do you see the video game industry? And I know this may be a bit of a big question, but I'm so curious to what you say.
Okay.
How do you see the video game industry itself evolving over the next decade, given some of these new pieces of emerging technology coming to the forefront, and maybe just the advancements in video game tech overall?
I think I mean, there's a lot of different approaches, right? I think that the 2010s, I think the story of the 2010s was digital distribution,
Yeah.
right? Moving from physical retail sales to the explosion of Steam and the explosion of all these other forms of digital consumption of video games. Looking at the 2020s, I think we're looking now at brand economy.
Hmm.
Xbox is going all in on that right now. PlayStation is slowly getting there. But just this idea that either a conglomerate like Xbox or a small independent company like Paradox will come out and say, hey, come play our games and then stay in our ecosystem, stay within our revenue streams. I think that's going to be like the big gaming shift. In terms of technology, we're looking at the Xbox Game Pass. We're looking at the game streaming like Stadia and
Yep.
xCloud and GeForce Now with NVIDIA. Like we're looking at how you can make those things happen, how you can get people within your economy. So I think that's like the next 10 years. I think that's the big thing. Obviously, a lot of people are going to look at VR as well.
Hmm.
I don't think that's coming in the early 2020s. It might come in the late 2020s,
I would
but
agree.
we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, no, I think those are some really good thoughts. And I think, as we kind of look at this next console generation about to come out here, I think this is going to definitely, in my opinion, I'll just give my opinion here and I want to hear your opinion. I think this will
Yeah, go for it.
probably be the last console generation that we have of physical hardware. And I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. But I think over the next 10 years, there are going to be more strides in just internet infrastructure in general, especially if they do get, quote unquote 5G up and running in the way that everybody is touting, and making high speed internet more accessible in rural areas. I really do think that even though, Stadia was kind of, let's just call Stadia the test to this whole entire
Yeah.
infrastructure of streaming games, I really do think that is where the video game industry is heading. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, certainly, I think that the platform, the people who are making the current consoles would be all in on that because they make those things with extremely tight margins, sometimes at a
Yeah.
loss. They have a great interest in transitioning to a model like that. At the same time, these consoles are great ways of, like I said, bringing people into that ecosystem.
Hmm.
If you buy a PlayStation, then you can only play PlayStation games.
Right.
So yeah, I totally agree. I think that they're going to try and certainly move into that model. But we'll see if the 2020s is where that fully takes place.
Yeah, it all really depends on the advancements that happen, because I know the big holdback still is, you look at something like Stadia, well, you still need a decent internet connection to be able to access that. And I can't
That's right.
remember what the statistic is, but a majority of people in the US who live outside, it can even be 20 to 25 miles. I don't know if it's similar in Canada, but 20 to 25 miles outside of a dense urban population center don't have good access to internet. Or if they do have
Yeah,
access to
absolutely.
internet, it's still DSL, or you're getting like 5 meg, per second.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And not to mention like the fact that a lot of people don't even know what Stadia is or how it
Right.
works, or the fact that it's not even really available to the public right now, just the people who buy in early and
Right.
like all of this, like they haven't done a great job of communicating everything. And pair that with the fact that it's probably not accessible for a lot of people.
Hmm.
We're off at a rocky start with, at least with them.
Yeah, and it's funny because I remember when they announced that, I was reading all the reports and different things, and I'm like, okay, if Google can actually get this to work, that really could be a game changer. And me and my best friend were actually pondering getting the founders edition of it, just because
Yeah.
I was like getting so sold on it. I'm like, all right, this is going to be a game changer for the industry. Of course, decided to hold back and then see the launch and was like, all right, Nick, maybe not so much.
That's right.
Now, again, we could talk about all day long the different factors involved and why the launch of that wasn't good. But I think the premise of that, where it really is just a service where you stream versus owning, I think is really interesting to me, because throughout the entire, history of this industry, you've always owned a game. You've always owned the software product or the
Oh,
cartridge
absolutely.
or the
Yep.
disc. So to think of a world where you just stream something but you don't own it, I don't know if it's scary. I don't know if it's something to be excited about. Have you put any thought into that?
I wouldn't say I'm necessarily scared of it. I think there's a clear reason why physical and digital distribution has evolved so heavily in the last 10 years. People are caring less and less. And a part of that as well is services like the Xbox Game Pass, where for 3 months, for first time purchasers, 3 months for $1. And then all of a sudden you're realizing, holy crap, I have a bunch of games at my disposal right now for the full purchase, which is like, I don't know, $10, $15 a month or whatever. I don't have to pay $60 every time I want a brand new video game. I can just pay for this service every month. I don't care if I own it or
Yeah.
not. Right. So there's like that aspect to it as well.
That was like me when Anthem came out, and I knew somehow that was something was going to go wrong there. So my best friend, again, he bought the $80 limited edition on
Right.
Steam,
Exactly.
and I'm like, there is no way I'm going to drop $80 on this. He's like, well, you can get the Origin Pass and get early access and all this stuff. So I did that. I spent maybe, I think it was $30 for 2 months on an Origin, and I'm so happy I did that, because clearly we saw how that turned out. So
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
would almost like to see a model where maybe you could do you could have a pass or a service like that before you buy the game, test it out for maybe a month, and then choose if you want to own the whole thing. I don't know.
I mean, in the old days, it was called a demo, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
those
true.
have proven, and those have, like, for the small companies or the few companies who have done that recently, it's actually been, I believe, quite successful for them. So
Yeah, I mean, I even remember when I had my original PlayStation 1 buying those demo discs. Like, they would have, actual like, just they were just called demo discs. I remember this, and I remember one had like Crash Bandicoot on it and Gex
that's right.
and some of these other things. You don't really see demos anymore, which is really
No.
interesting. Even when I got my PlayStation 3, I was downloading demos for the new Ratchet and Clank game that was coming out, a couple of different FPS shooter games, and yeah, you don't see demos anymore. I wonder why that is. I've kind of been pondering that myself. Is it just because people are just so trigger happy to buy these days, or what do you think?
I mean, it's possible that people, the various companies were seeing the margins and the ROIs, and it just wasn't
Yeah.
worth it to them. Like, that is possible. I think the other aspect to it is that so many of these companies now, especially with where tech is and how much work goes into a video game, it's rare that a demo that comes out a week before, 3 weeks before, I don't know how ready those things are actually going to be,
Right.
just because of how tight those deadlines are for those companies. So it's kind of hard to adding that onto the plate of a team is
Yeah.
already asking a lot.
Well, especially with how more robust games have become as well. Before, I knew it took a long time, in the ages of, of course, Dreamcast and N64 and then PlayStation and PS2. I still know it took a long time to produce a game. But even you look at now, some of these big blockbuster titles. I mean, we were just talking about God of War that I'm trying to catch up on. I mean, that was years in production for that thing. So I just
Yeah,
think
the
that,
typical game cycle right now is like 3 to 4 years.
yeah, I mean, and it shows for the good ones, but with just the nature of the technology and the story and all these different aspects that I think the industry is trying to weave into it, it's just extended the timeline. So actually think that's a really good point you made about why there's been less of a focus on the demo aspect. So as maybe we look at the emerging technology part of this, how do you think emerging pieces of technology like AI, voice will play more of a role in video games?
It's interesting. I talked about this before. When it comes to like voice specifically, what it's asking its players to do is to take the controller out of the hand. I mean, not necessarily, but if you're looking at like a full voice experience of a video game, it's saying stop using the thing that you've been using for 50 years and start using your voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that aspect to it. And the thing that I've been kind of saying all the time is that if that's going to, I think the most likely route that voice succeeds in that area is looking at VR and looking at what VR is already successfully doing
Yeah.
and how is voice going to kind of integrate itself into that. When it comes to the other forms of technology, AI I mean, look at everything else that gaming is doing, facial recognition
Yeah.
and computational power and all that stuff. Like they're making huge strides in that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know necessarily, like that is probably outside of my area of expertise, whatever that stuff is happening on the back end. But certainly you look at games that are being made today, and it's amazing the things that they're able to do when you read the article that they talk about it or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one.
Right. Well, and there's always been quote unquote AI engines, right? Like in gamer slang, it's always like, oh, you're going up against an AI, who the opponent is, if it's not another live person, or different things like that. So they've always had components of AI. I feel like in video games when you're going up
Oh, of
against
course.
the
Yeah.
computer, quote unquote. But I'm really excited to see how they take that even further. Like, imagine putting a full blown machine learning algorithm with inside of a game that can make adjustments real time as opposed to something pre-programmed, which I think we do have now in some capacities. But I'm
Yeah.
talking about like really going full bore on that and seeing what's possible, to where even the game designers don't even know how the computer is going to react to
Right.
certain situations. And I mean, we've seen that a bit with something. What was a game that did something? No Man's Sky. Again, I know the initial release of
Yes.
that bombed, but the way that it generated the worlds and the environment and everything was all via AI and random computer generation.
That's right.
So even to see something like that, and we could do that back in 2016, I mean, I can only imagine how this is just going to make our game experiences that much smarter and lifelike.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many different forms that can take as well, right? Like there's a game that came out called the Turing Test. Obviously, Alan Turing, really well known for
Yeah.
his brain, but the game came out and it had a computer in it which you could just say anything to, and hypothetically, it was supposed to respond with something that was relevant to what you were
Oh my
talking about,
gosh.
right? Yeah. There's also I don't know if I guess this would be AI, but a game came out called A Plague Tale: Innocence. It's all about the Inquisition and these two children trying to survive like this weird mix of the Inquisition and some supernatural stuff. But anyway, in that game, there's the plague, and there's literally thousands and thousands of rats on the screen all at once,
Oh my
and they're
gosh.
all operating independently. And I was like, how does somebody make a game with 1,000 rats doing different things? Like,
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. See, I didn't even know something like that existed. I feel like I just want to go watch a video on that.
yeah, you
And
definitely should.
I mean, even, maybe taking us out of the AI voice conversation, even look at streaming, right? I would consider streaming almost an emerging piece of tech that has really hit the video game industry here. I mean, what has it been since like 2016? Twitch has had like an ungodly amount of
Oh yeah.
month over month and year over year growth. And then of course, Microsoft trying to get that Mixer platform up and running. And I thought I read something somewhere that a majority of video watched on YouTube now is related to video games. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But
I'm sure it's true. I mean, video games is the largest entertainment industry in the world. It's more than movies and music combined. It's
right.
I'm amazed at how everything has taken off and gone into the mainstream, and especially with these live streamers and these influencers. Like you look at a game like Apex Legends. This is a game that had no marketing budget except for influencers, where they dropped the game without announcing it. Like one day they were just like, "Hey, we have a new video game now." And all of a sudden there were 50, 100, 200 live streamers being
Really?
paid to
That's how
play
they
it.
did that? I didn't even know
That
that's
is
how
how they did that.
there was no marketing behind that.
No, nobody knew about Apex Legends
Oh
before
my
the release
gosh.
date,
I didn't know
and
that.
it became an overnight success. It is still to this day like being played by millions of people because they just surprise dropped it and
I
made a
was
bunch of live streamers
wondering
play it.
how that got so popular so quickly. Well, that definitely then is a testament to this influencer market that's grown on these streaming platforms. I mean, look at the Ninja, that streamer guy. I mean, talk about
Yep.
somebody who was streaming freaking Fortnite in his basement and then all of a sudden is like now a multimillionaire and one of the most recognizable faces in the video game industry. I mean,
Yeah.
like
It's amazing. It's incredible.
it's such an interesting time, I think, for this industry, and especially now as we look at at the date of recording of this podcast, what we're looking at globally with the spread of COVID-19 and everything. I think more and more people are going to, and of course, people have been playing video games en masse, of course, for a while. But I think I wouldn't be shocked if more people go even deeper down the rabbit hole into video games and Of course, we were talking before we started recording here because of that Steam season increase in sales, Xbox Live season increase in sales, PlayStation Store season increase in sales, and I would really be curious to see the impact of what COVID-19 is having on the video game industry. That'd be a really interesting study, I think. Hopefully, someone
Yeah.
should conduct. Maybe something that even you could share some thoughts on in one of your Gaming Observer episodes. I don't know, but I would really be interested to see the impact that this is having on the video game industry in particular.
It's really interesting. I've already had actually a few people DM me on like Twitter being like, "Hey, obviously I have some free time now, so do you have any video games you think me and a bunch of friends should be playing?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I got your back." But how many people are doing that?
Right.
And now going back into that ecosystem, how many of them are going to stick around when COVID isn't around anymore, hypothetically? And specifically this year, this holiday, we have two consoles being dropped from Xbox and PlayStation. How are, with the stock markets being down and everything like that, how is
Right.
that going to play out compared to previous generations?
Right.
It's going to be really interesting to watch.
Well, and like you mentioned too on one of your recent Gaming Observer episodes, we were just talking about as well, is E3 being canceled. And we
That's right.
kind of talked about how E3's kind of been hurting, it seems, over the past few years, but to outright cancel that, to the point you made in your Gaming Observer episode, that is where indie developers and smaller people get face-to-face time with larger folks who can invest. So
Yeah, and it's not just E3. It's so many other conferences, specifically the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. It's this opportunity for smaller developers to go and get funding for their games, because making games is extremely expensive, and when you are a small startup, you really can't afford that. It's so difficult, and so many deals are made at GDC and at E3, and to have those canceled, like the we as consumers are looking at that and being like, "Oh no, I don't get all of my announcements in one place." But truthfully, we're probably going to miss out on a bunch of announcements in 3 years, in 4 years, because
Right.
deals weren't made this year.
Well, then you look at GameStop, of course, trying to completely redo their business model by kind of hunkering down on, oh, we're going to bring more people actually into the store and make little gaming
That's
hubs.
right.
And COVID-19.
Yeah. GameStop is looking super perilous right now. They were already teetering on the edge, and now with this, wow, it's really something.
Yeah, well, and I know you mentioned too that they brought Reggie over from Nintendo of America to kind of help with that as well, and he's very good at what he does. So I'd be curious to see what comes out of this. But yeah, when you're going all in on that model right now of trying to get more people to come in store, and then you have global pandemic 2020, I'd be
Yeah, and to make matter, like, okay, so if there's anybody listening who doesn't know, GameStop, traditionally a retail store that sells video games and video game accessories and whatnot. They've gone through a lot of financial trouble, and then recently they're like, okay, let's make this a gaming hub where you can experience video games. So they'll have like machines set up where you can play games and interact with people, have a social night, et cetera, et cetera. And now all of a sudden, obviously people don't even want to leave their house in the first place, let alone touch a controller that everybody's been touching all day.
Yeah, that too. I didn't even think about that one.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think hopefully maybe some studies will come out seeing what the impact of this was on the video game industry, whether that be positive or negative. But I think to the point you made with this being a console release year, I'll be really interested to see what those numbers are like. I mean, I'll be honest, I've turned into more of a PC gamer more than anything over the past couple of years myself.
I have as well, yeah.
But I still think, of course, there's something to be said about owning a PlayStation or owning an Xbox or owning a Nintendo console. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. But as we go ahead.
I was just going to say the company that has a lot of momentum into this generation is PlayStation, because of their exclusives. What they did with PlayStation 4 this year was Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man, God of War, Ratchet and Clank. Like, they came out with these major releases, and that moved a lot of sales. And then they now have sequels for these games coming up. And that's going to happen on the PS5, and you're not going to be able to play those games without a PS5. Xbox, they're diversifying. They're putting they're putting Halo on PC. They're putting all of their key IPs on as many platforms as they can besides PlayStation. And that means you may not necessarily need their console.
Yeah, which I think that's a very interesting move as well, to kind of diversify that a bit more. But I mean, heck, Sea of Thieves, you have to buy that from the Microsoft App Store. You couldn't get that necessarily on Steam unless I'm wrong. But when I bought Sea of Thieves,
I think there's still some games that are, they're making the transition right now, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'll be very interested to see what comes out of this. But as we kind of wrap things down though, from this awesome discussion we had, I always like to end on this one question because I love the different perspectives I get from the people that I bring on the show. But what is one thing that you think someone can do today to begin leveraging, in our case, voice assistant technology, either personally or within their organization?
Yeah, that's another tough one for me because my scope on it is fairly limited to flash briefings and perhaps video games. I think that there's a lot of exciting opportunities that are happening here that we're discovering in ways that we never really knew before. You and I first met at Project Voice
Yep.
earlier this year, and that was like my big awakening of like, holy crap, there's so much going on, right? And healthcare and automotive and everything. And I knew it existed, but like I was forced to look at it there, right?
Yeah.
And so you look at how many opportunities there are, and I think it's really exciting. And for me, just within my own scope and my own, knowing what I know, I think flash briefings are a really exciting way to connect with your audience, to potentially start or continue one. And I think I really want a lot more people making them. Something we didn't mention on this show is that looking at it from a business perspective and growing an audience and everything, it's great, it's awesome. I'm getting an opportunity here, like I said, of a lifetime. It's life changing, but at the same time, the thing that I really got out of the Observer is the personal connections and
Mhm.
the thank yous that I get through emails. And I got an Amazon review from someone, and I say this one all the time, but he was out of touch with video games for a long time, and then his son was really into video games, and he said that he sort of started listening to my show, and now he's closer with his son
That's
because
awesome.
he was now into the video game sphere. And I get
Wow.
comments like that all the time. And so like that, even if I just get like one or two of those things over the course of making this whole show, it's been worth it. So
Absolutely.
that, I guess I kind of want to push that onto people of saying, if you're thinking of starting a flash briefing or getting into voice technology or whatever it is, it's enabling these conversations, and it's making these things happen.
Well, and impacting people's lives positively. And I mean, especially, again, looking at things happening around the world, I think the more you can impact people positively with the work that you're doing, and see comments like that and get feedback. I mean, that's just incredible. I'm so happy to hear that you're getting stories like that. And I'm sure that's fuel for you as well to keep pushing harder and farther to keep
Oh,
producing
100%.
this and making it better for folks. So that's incredible. Well, Adrian, this has been such an awesome conversation. I've enjoyed talking with you so much just about flash briefings and video games and everything. It's been amazing. But if anybody wanted to reach out to you or get in touch with you, what are some of the best ways for them to do so?
Yeah, you can send me an email, adrian@adriansimple.com. You can find me on Twitter @gaming_observer, or go to thegamingobserver.com. You can find all of the links for the Observer there. Please feel free to reach out for anything. If you're looking to start a flash briefing, if you are looking for help, whatever it is, I'm a totally open book. I don't charge anything. I will help you out for free.
That's awesome. And I'll include some links to, of course, the Gaming Observer and then the flash briefing and some of the other stuff that Adrian has been working on in the episode notes as well. So feel free to go and check out some of those links. But Adrian, again, this has been an amazing conversation. So thankful that you were able to make some time here and chat with me. And I'm really excited to keep in touch with you and see how the space evolves and just how the Gaming Observer continues to evolve.
Yeah, Nick, thank you so much for having me on here. I had a really great time. It's not often that I get to come onto a podcast and geek out about video games, so that's been very exciting for me.
No, it's been equally exciting for me, and I appreciate it so much. And I'm excited to chat soon. And take care.
Yeah, you as well.
Artificial intelligence, voice recognition, machine learning, robotics.
You've been listening to the Artificial Podcast with your host, Nick Myers. To stay up to date with all our latest episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts. To learn more about how your organization can benefit by unlocking the power of AI and voice, visit www.redfox-ai.com. Until next time.